I declare war. Before I get started, I want to make a disclaimer. The opinions expressed in this video are mine and mine alone. They don't express the opinions of my employer, my associates, my advertisers, or my friends. And the same is true for all of my videos on this channel and on my New Possibilities channels. So now that that's out the way, this video right here is a response to David Carroll's video entitled "The KKK and the NAACP are one and the same." Only in YouTube land would this kind of video even be necessary to respond to. Only in YouTube land would you have people actually co-signing and supporting this foolishness. Only here would you have this happen. And the bottom line is this is no surprise. I mean, this is what this man does on YouTube. He defends white racists. When a white racist cop kills black people, this man is one of the first people out there, out front, defending that cop. When a white racist makes racist statements about black people, here comes this bootlicking sellout, there to defend that racist. When a sellout betrays the black community, here comes David Carroll to defend that sellout. He puts on his cape and he comes in to rescue sellouts, racists, and police who brutalize black people. In fact, couple of years ago, this guy actually did a video explaining why he supports the KKK. So it is no surprise that this man would be running to the defense of a Southern racist who compared the KKK to the NAACP, suggesting that they were one and the same, which is outrageous on his face. So what I'm going to do is play excerpts from this video and respond as we go along.
Been riding this guy ever since he's been on the minstrel show because of a few tweets that he had sent out. And the person that I'm referring to is, of course, the guy by the name of Lee. And one of the tweets that has everybody up in arms and everybody was pissed off was a tweet that he sent out comparing, where he actually asked, and I'm paraphrasing, what's the difference between the KKK and the NAACP? And then he went on to say that, well, at least the KKK has enough sense. Well, he actually called them racist. At least those racists actually have enough sense to cover their faces. And this particular tweet had everybody up in arms, particularly the Negroes. And I thought I would come and I would do a video actually defending him, defending Lee. And the reason,
again, that's no surprise. That's what this guy does. He loves defending white racists.
The reason why I'm going to defend Lee is because Lee was not wrong. And I'm going to deal with this in a minute, but I'm going to give some backdrop before we actually get into how Lee was actually right in what he said. So because of that significant ruling in the Brown case, people will immediately think that, well, the NAACP, oh my God, when you look at all the good that they've done, how could you equate them with the Ku Klux Klan? And anyone who would do that clearly doesn't understand the NAACP. And I would argue that anyone who wouldn't do that don't understand the NAACP. And I've said this in many of my videos. I've covered this time after time.
So I have to address this point. So, I mean, the fact that he would compare the KKK to the NAACP is just preposterous. I mean, the KKK, as I pointed out in my other video on my New Possibilities channel, was a terrorist organization. It is a terrorist organization. It is a white supremacist organization, an organization that openly advocates hatred towards black people, an organization that has engaged in violence against black people, including bombing of churches, killing children, lynching people, shooting people, blowing people up. burning people, whipping people. That's the history of the KKK. The KKK was put in place to prevent black people from exercising their civil rights in this country, their right to vote, their right to go where they please, basic human rights. That's what the KKK was designed to do. Now, to compare that to a civil rights organization such as the NAACP is ridiculous. Even this guy, David Carroll, is forced to acknowledge the good that the NAACP has done in terms of fighting to end segregation in education, the Brown versus Board of Education decision. The NAACP has also done work in terms of advancing civil rights when it comes to voting rights, when it comes to criminal justice, when it comes to police brutality, when it comes to other aspects of education, housing, public accommodations, and the list goes on and on. The NAACP fights to protect civil rights, fights to expand civil rights, fights against discrimination, whereas the KKK fights to discriminate against people, fights to restrict people's rights. The NAACP is fighting for equality, and the KKK is about maintaining a system of white supremacy. So to equate the two is just ridiculous. I mean, the fact that the KKK attacked and killed members of the NAACP speaks to the animosity between the two. It speaks to the fact that they are not one and the same. And this is just common sense, and anybody with a brain understands this. But only in YouTube land is this some kind of controversial statement.
Time after time that the NAACP is not now, nor has it ever been, a black organization. It's just not. It's not.
Now, this is a point that I have to respond to because he's going to go on and he's going to talk about how a lot of the founders of the NAACP were white and all that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is, there were black founders in the NAACP. So that's the first point. You know, the NAACP really came out of the Niagara movement. The Niagara movement was like a precursor to the NAACP. So that's one point. The second point is this. Now, we could talk about what happened 100 years ago, but if you look at the NAACP today, you will see that the board of directors is over 99% black. You will see that the senior staff in the national office is over 90% black. You will see that in the field, that most of the branch presidents and branch officers are African American. Most of the membership is African American. So even though anyone of any race can join the NAACP, the fact of the matter is the overwhelming majority of the leadership and the membership is black. There is no organization that has done more in terms of advancing civil rights for African Americans than the NAACP. And for this ungrateful buffoon to compare the NAACP to an organization that terrorized the community to prevent us from having civil rights, it's just preposterous on its face. It's just flat out stupid. And this video right here is one of the dumbest videos that this guy has ever done. The only video that I could say was dumber than this one is the one where he actually explained why he supports the KKK. So let's go on with this commentary from him.
Even when you go back to 1909, when you talk about the founders, you had two members who were black of the founders, Ida B. Wells, Du Bois. The only two black. Ida B. Wells was popular because of her work in the anti-lynching campaign. I believe she actually wrote a book. I can't recall the title of her book, but it dealt with lynching in America. I believe that matter of fact, that might have been the title. And we already.
And that's another analogy. I mean, that's another point that can be raised. Whereas the KKK participated in lynchings of black people, you had the NAACP fighting to end lynchings in this country. As this man acknowledges, he acknowledges the work of one of the founders of the NAACP, Ida B. Wells, in her anti-lynching campaign. That was one of the first missions of the NAACP, to fight lynchings in this country, to end the practice of lynching. That's what the Silent March was about. That was celebrated or commemorated a few days ago. So again, this comparison is ridiculous, it's preposterous, and
Know about the prolific literary work of one Du Bois, even though he has some other questionable shit that some people don't like about him, particularly when you talk about his.
and before he goes on to this questionable stuff, first of all, I mean, no one doubts that Du Bois was one of the greatest minds in American history, in world history, in fact. One of the greatest intellectuals in the black community who discussed the major problems facing the black community. And yet and still, you have this buffoon, David Carroll, trying to compare this organization that Du Bois helped found to the KKK. I mean, what can be more idiotic?
CP did not have, and don't quote me on this, but you can look it up. I believe it was not until maybe the late 70s, early 90s that they actually had a black president, national black president.
That's incorrect.
It's not.
That's incorrect. There were prior black executive secretaries of the NAACP and presidents before then. And I will post pictures of them so that people can see those black presidents. So what you have here is a guy that's completely exaggerating, trying to paint the NAACP as a white organization, which is not. Anybody with a set of eyes can see that it is not a white organization. It is not exclusively black, but it is primarily a black organization in terms of the membership and leadership again. And another point that has to be raised about this is simple. Even if one were to assume that what he's saying is correct about the NAACP being a quote unquote white organization, that still doesn't make it equivalent to the KKK. It just doesn't, for the reasons that I previously stated. So let's continue on with this nonsense.
A black organization, and how they're able to hide the fact that they're really an organization full of paternalistic white liberals is because they preach victimology. And I just told you.
I mean, this guy keeps saying it's full of white liberals, but where are these white liberals that he's talking about? They're not, when you look at the membership, when you look at the leadership, when you look at the board of directors, these people that he's talking about don't really exist. What you see are black people in those positions again.
Y'all in the video that I done last week. Victimology will allow you to be excused for your hypocrisy. If you preach victimology, then we'll turn a blind eye to the dirt that you do. We know this is in the case of.
See, and when people like this guy speak out against so-called victimology, all they're trying to do is provide cover for white supremacy. They're providing excuses for racism. They're avoiding a conversation about very real problems by labeling any complaints about legitimate issues as victimology. It's just a method to silence people. It's a method to shame people for speaking out against injustice in society. And that's what these Negro apologists, these Negro mouthpieces for white supremacy specialize in, trying to suppress legitimate complaints about racism and inequality in society.
They turn a blind eye to the paternalism that oozes from the founders and even the board members of the NAACP. They turn a blind.
I mean, he's talking about paternalism from the board members. I mean, how are they paternalistic when most of them are black? How are they paternalistic towards themselves? I mean, that doesn't make any kind of sense. And what's paternalistic about trying to end discrimination? What's paternalistic about trying to end lynching in America? What's paternalistic about trying to end unequal and separate education in this country? What's paternalistic about ending discriminatory policing practices, police brutality, racial profiling? There is nothing paternalistic about fighting to end racism and prejudice in this country. But this is the logic of a person like this. I mean, this is coon logic, a prime example of coon logic. But let's continue
blind
on.
eye to this. What Lee tweeted, Lee was right. There essentially is no different in the NAACP and the Klan. Absolutely none. I don't care. Well, I can't say I don't care anything about the Brown decision because we know the historical significance of the Brown decision. So I'll give them a pass. Well, not them. I actually will give Thurgood Marshall props for arguing that case before the Supreme Court. But even though the NAACP supported him, it was the legal defense team that he was working for. So the NAACP is going to be connected to it. There's no way around it. So this is what they use. Because of the significance of the Brown decision, look, we've done a lot of good. And they're always out in the street.
And it's not just about the Brown decision, it's about the things that the NAACP does today in terms of protesting against police brutality, protesting against unjust sentencing of African Americans, in terms of fighting to end the disparities in education, fighting in the arena of environmental justice, fighting to end discrimination in public accommodations in places like Myrtle Beach. So it's not just the Brown versus Board of Education decision. I mean, this guy sounds ridiculous. But let's continue on.
Street protesting. Whenever there's a cop shooting, they go to NAACP, the national chapter. You got some black pastor who's the president of the local chapter, and he's standing there in front of the microphone spewing his rhetoric, blaming the police officer, blaming the police department for being racist. And when these cops get off or they happen to get arrested, they go through the system and they don't get convicted, they're blaming the system, they're blaming the judge. Everybody is racist, according to the local chapters of the NAACP, and most certainly according to the national board. They just had their convention a few weeks ago in Baltimore. And they all stand there and they actually engage in intellectual masturbation where they get each other off by fondling each other intellectually. This is what they do at those conventions. But I'm going to tell you,
This guy he sounds so ridiculous. I mean, the whole point of the NAACP's convention is to set the policy for the organization, to determine the direction that the organization will go on various issues in the community, to set a list of priorities and stuff. So it's not about some intellectual discourse. It's a groundwork for a plan of action. It's a groundwork for actual action. See, unlike a lot of people and a lot of groups and a lot of people here on YouTube, the NAACP doesn't just sit around talking about issues. The NAACP actually fights to bring about change. They fight to change the laws. They fight in the courts and they fight in the streets by protesting. So it's not about some intellectual, quote unquote, masturbation. It's about a plan of action. That's what the NAACP is about. And here we are, 15 minutes into this guy's video. And yet and still, he hasn't provided any kind of arguments to back up his lame position that the KKK and the NAACP are one and the same. But we'll continue on to see if he eventually gets to it. And just to, again, I listened to this whole thing before. He's going to get to the point at some point toward the end, and his argument is very weak. But let's listen to what he has to say.
tell you how, if you really disagree with me, I'm going to tell you how you can actually do something. If you want to see, I'm going to show you what you do. in your local chapter. I don't know when this shindig, and I've done a video on this actually. If you follow me, you remember I actually talked about this in a video. And it's the big shindig for the local chapters. And it's called the NAACP Freedom Fund Dinner. It's a big to do. I mean, everybody's dressed to the nines. You got the women in their gowns. You got these monkey. I mean, damn. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I'm thinking I'm in the hole, man.
See, and this is one thing about this guy. I mean, what he does is present his arguments one way when he's on the public platform of YouTube, and then he has another way that he presents his arguments when he does these private videos. I only saw one of them because somebody sent it to me like a long time ago, where this guy uses all kinds of derogatory terms to refer to his own people, calling black people monkeys, as he did right here, calling black people the N-word. I mean, this is a man who doesn't have any kind of respect for black people. He doesn't think black people are intelligent. I mean, he talks about black people as if he is not black. This man has a white supremacist mindset. And a lot of people don't understand that. They don't really get that, apparently based on these comments that people leave to his videos, based on the ratings of his videos. People are clueless. And I understand that a lot of these people that support this guy, that support this buffoon, are white racists, but it's also a whole bunch of ignorant black people as well. But let's continue on with this video.
That's y'all fault. But you have their whole schnick, how they work this thing.
Now, one thing to point out is this. I mean, first of all, the NAACP doesn't universally condemn all corporations or prosecutors or law enforcement. So the fact that you would have corporations sponsoring freedom funds, or you would have prosecutors and law enforcement attending some freedom funds, that doesn't mean anything. Because, the NAACP doesn't universally condemn those institutions. The NAACP opposes racism. And we'll get into that a little bit later.
How they get money into their organization. And matter of fact, I'll tell you again before I tell you what you're going to say at the NAACP dinner. Let me tell you again in case you forgot. You remind you because it may show up on the exam. I told you, let's say on your job, whatever your job is. Let's say you're having problems on your job. You go to the NAACP and you complain. They're discriminating against me on my job. They're passing me over for raises and promotions just because I'm black. This is what they're going to say. NAACP, let's say you work at, I think of some company off the top. Let's say you work at Apple. I'm going to just throw that off the top of my head. And they're discriminating against you. So the NAACP say, okay, it sounds like you have a case. We're going to go talk to Apple. They go talk to Apple and do their own investigation. And they get back to you and tell you, you know what, we're going to take this case. We're going to go back to Apple. We're going to tell them that we found evidence that what this person is saying is true. And we're going to file a complaint and we're going to sue. Now, Apple don't want that bad press. Apple don't want that. That's the last thing they want. The last thing they want is to be called a racist. And again, that's the reason why I told y'all as a side note why it was intelligent for Lee to apologize on that Bachelorette. That's the worst thing a white person can be called in this day of political correctness, is a racist. So he had to apologize for that stuff on national TV because he couldn't stand by it. He doesn't believe that. The Negroes bought it, but I didn't buy it. I know he still believes that. And actually, he's right. But let's get back to the NAACP. They go talk to Apple. Apple don't want this foolishness. Apple asked the NAACP, what can we do? How can we squash this? Now, you would think the NAACP would say, well, listen, promote the guy who's eligible for promotions. Give him his raise.
And that's exactly what the NAACP would say and do. The NAACP, before resolving any such case, they would make sure that there was an agreement that would end the discriminatory policies and practices of that particular company. The NAACP would not simply accept a membership in order to resolve such a discrimination case. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's exaggerating and he's misrepresenting the facts. But this is the core point that he's relying on, a point that's based on nothing but falsehood.
That's no, they don't say that. What they will tell Apple is, listen, if you take out a life membership in the NAACP, we will squash the lawsuit.
Again, that's just straight up false. I mean, if you look at the cost of a life membership for a corporation, it is a relatively small amount of money compared to the cost of settling a discrimination case. So this guy simply doesn't know what he's talking about. Again, before the NAACP would resolve any kind of settlement, before they would resolve or reach some kind of negotiation with a company that has been accused of discrimination, they would make sure that the company ended their discriminatory policies. They would make sure that that company had policies in place to promote diversity, that would promote uh, the advancement of African Americans within that company. So again, this guy is exaggerating. This guy is making blatant false representations of how the NAACP operates.
So Apple takes out a life membership, which is big bucks. That's big bucks. It's not cheap. They take out a life membership in the NAACP. That's the reason why.
And again, like he's saying, it's not cheap. It's the amount is relatively small compared to how much it would cost to settle a discrimination suit.
All right, now let's get back to the Freedom Fund dinner. That's the reason why when you go to that Freedom Fund dinner, and I'm going to tell you who you're going to see there. You know who you're going to see there? You're going to see Apple there. Because why? Apple is a part of the organization. You're going to see cops. You're going to see prosecutors. You're going to see lawyers. You're going to see judges. And keep in mind, now these are the same cops, the same lawyers, the same judges that they said and protested against and said were racist.
Number one, I mean, this whole thing is a complete misrepresentation of what's going on. The NAACP doesn't invite races to the Freedom Fund dinners. At the Freedom Fund dinners, they invite people who are making strides in their corporations or in law enforcement to correct problems in those institutions, that are trying to correct discriminatory practices and end discriminatory practices. They don't honor law enforcement that is engaged in police brutality. They do not honor companies that engage in discriminatory practices. The NAACP maintains lines of communication with law enforcement and corporations, but it challenges the discriminatory practices and policies of corporations and law enforcement. As he has pointed out, he pointed out how the NAACP will speak out at rallies and stuff against discriminatory practices. So let's continue on.
And they offer them the same deal. Listen, if you take out a life membership, hey, it's all good.
Again, that's false. There are countless examples of the NAACP protesting against police brutality, demanding justice for victims of police brutality. The NAACP does not stop its mission simply because somebody offers to pay a couple of dollars. The NAACP demands changes in the elimination of racial discrimination, of racial prejudice. That's the mission of the NAACP, and that's the work that the NAACP does. The NAACP is not for sale. It stands on its principles. So again, this guy is making complete misrepresentations. He's making outright false statements and lies.
So the white person, if they have any brains, would say, fuck it, I'll take out a life membership. So therefore, whatever I do, When the Negroes come back to me and say, you're racist, I can say, no, I'm not racist. How can you say you're not racist? Because I am a life member of the NAACP.
And, you know, people had this false perception that they can buy silence from the NAACP. The fact of the matter is this: no matter what kind of donation a company makes to the NAACP, if that company engages in discriminatory practices afterwards, the NAACP will challenge that company. No one can buy silence from the NAACP.
About the NAACP and the Klan, that's the reason why he was right. And when they got him on that show and all those brothers started pounding and jumping on him, piling on him, it would have been suicidal for him to stand there on national TV and defend that tweet. You can't do that. You right now have to fall on the sword, which was very intelligent of him. Very intelligent. Fall on the sword. Appear like you're sorry. Why? Because, man, you still got to work.
I mean, this is one point that I do agree with him on. That guy Lee is disingenuous. His apology was fake as hell. He obviously believed those tweets when he put them out. And it's only now that everyone was confronting him that he decided, well, no, I apologize, I'm sorry, and this and that. So that's the one thing that I agree with this clown David Carroll on. I mean, even a broken clock can be right twice a day.
And if you on national TV and they're branding you as this bigot or this racist, no matter what field you're in, you're done. This is the reason why you will find certain people who put tweets up or put posts on Facebook and their employer come back and look at that shit. Oh, you're done. You're finished. You can't tweet. You can't post this stuff about this Negro and put. Now that's your private Facebook page. It don't make no difference. Listen, you post that up, you're finished. Human Resources is going to tap you on the show to get in here. We got to talk to you. You got to go. We don't need that. So that was intelligent for Lee to fall on the sword on that minstrel show on Monday. But I know he still believes this because he's right. He's not wrong. And when you try to explain this to black folks, I'm telling you, it's like talking to a bark of a tree, man. I'm telling you, you can sit down and explain to them in clear, concise language, and this Negro just don't get it, man. I'm telling you, it's just.
Well, I mean, this guy hasn't even made his argument. He hasn't made a sound argument. There's nothing to get here. This guy's argument is weak as hell. I mean, the example that he laid out about groups coming to the Freedom Fund and, certain companies making donations to the NAACP is a weak point. It's not based in reality and facts. And that's all that he strings this argument on. That's all that he lays this argument on. That's his foundation for this weak argument.
I'm really beginning to believe that there's something to this whole bell curve. Now, I'm gonna leave that alone because I know that I would have to deal with that in the whole. But
see, and I'm not surprised that he would say something like this, about the bell curve, basically suggesting that black people are not as intelligent as white people. I mean, he says this stuff all the time. He constantly talks about how dumb black men are. That's one of his key talking points. This man has internalized white racism, and he spews it out towards his own people. He has the mind of a white racist, just like a lot of these people. He is nothing but your typical sellout, your typical house Negro who thinks with a white mind, a white racist mindset.